This week in churches around the world, an ancient Jewish story will be retold. A story popularised by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice in Joseph and His Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's a story, it's the epic saga of a family in which there's inner conflict and turmoil, envy and jealousy, and one son lording it over the others, of this fighting and this tension building up, of revenge and retaliation, of the descent of this one Joseph into slavery and imprisonment, humiliation, and in the humility of this growing, maturing, growing into a fullness, and recognising that the gifts and talents that are in him are best used for the common good and the well-being of others, generously and lavishly, not for his own exclusive use and purposes. But also drawing on this God of his ancestors who has journeyed with him. And it's a story of this God who walks with and through the life of another, and is always there, drawing and inviting out into a bigger life, into a bigger way of seeing and being and experiencing the world. And the God who is always there and willing to work with. And ultimately it's about reconciliation and forgiveness for this family. It's a story that's a story of our world, of life, of families and communities and nations. It's a story of hope. It's a story that points us towards this goal, this ideal of reconciliation and peace that comes through understanding and awareness and forgiveness, a deeper awareness of who we are and who the other is, and of forgiving them, of recognising our own faults and confessing that and being forgiven. It's a hard story in many ways because it's a story that confronts families, communities and nations. And it's a story that points to an alternate way in the world. And it'll be read alongside another story, Luke's story of Jesus. And this week, the continuation of Luke's story of the Sermon on the Plain. His equivalent, I guess, to Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, which is perhaps a little more well known. And the centrepiece of this week's reading is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto other people what you would like them to do towards you. Live into their shoes and their being and their experience and understand that. And understand how it is you would like to be treated in that situation. And then live in that way. These words are actually the heart of many faiths. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you is found in most faith traditions. It's about love. It's about opening our eyes to love. And it's a counter story to the violence of the world. In the world in which we live, the longest, one theologian said, Walter Wink says, the oldest myth under which humanity is operated is the myth of redemptive violence, which basically says violence can redeem violence and bring peace. If you hurt me, I hurt you back harder until you submit and there'll be peace. I may win the battle, but the war still rages because you won't forget. And when the time comes and you have the resources, you'll bring a bigger army to fight me with more bombs and guns and whatever. And then I'll fight back and you'll fight back. We surely learn this, in the war on terror, which has raged for 20 odd years. What have we achieved? Except death, suffering, pain, and the spending of trillions of dollars on armaments, blowing up trillions of dollars, killing people, fighting, hating, and then walking away without a solution. hasn't brought peace, and it won't. And the way of Jesus is a way of reconciliation. It's a way of stepping into the other's shoes and trying to see the world from their perspective and acting out of that wisdom. He says, love your enemies and do good to those who hurt you. Pray for them. I've been rereading this, A Testament of Hope. It's the writings and speeches of Martin Luther King Jr., where he speaks of non-violent resistance. A lot of his work and his ideas were influenced by Gandhi, who himself was influenced heavily by Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. I've also been looking at Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela and a book by Desmond Tutu. People, men, and along with people like Dorothy Day, Simone Weil and others, men and women who have stood up and spoken out against violence and abuse and oppression and injustice and the evil in the world. And the centre of what King says is we don't hate the people, but we fight and resist for all we're worth the injustices and the evil that's perpetrated. We don't hate and hurt and seek revenge on the people, but we fight to expose the truth about injustice and evil. And it takes great compassion, great courage and great commitment. For King, it cost him his life, and as it's cost others their lives, in fighting for truth, in resisting evil, in resisting oppression and injustice, but not seeking revenge and violence. And that's what Jesus is really on about here. He's saying, seek the way of love, the way of forgiveness, the way of fighting evil, but not taking revenge or retaliation or using violence against people. Because violence will just beget more violence, and we descend and become like those we are resisting. He's saying, stand above that. Take the way of love. It's not a simplistic thing. He's not suggesting that we become doormats where anything goes, where we just accept whatever anyone puts onto us, oppression, abuse, whatever. We resist that. But he says it's going to cost. When you don't hate the person and take retaliation on the person, seek the justice and the ways of justice, and they may have to pay a price for the evil they've committed. But we don't use violence. It is to understand this is to see people like Brittany Higgins and Grace Tame, who are trying to raise the voice about sexual abuse. And it's not easy. They come out of their own deep pain and anguish and suffering. And they're trying to raise a voice in a world that doesn't always want to hear. Or those people, black deaths in custody, the families of Indigenous people who have died in custody, in situations that haven't been fair or right. Or the black deaths in America, where there are more than hints of racism and extraordinary violence because of colour. It's about people in minority groups and oppressed groups, people in detention centres speaking out and seeking justice, seeking a fair go, and who are being ignored and neglected. It takes great courage to stand up to the powerful voices and forces who run the world, who operate the world, to resist the likes of Vladimir Putin and say that fighting and warfare and aggression against other nations such as Ukraine is not on. It is to stand up and oppose the violence and evil in the world, but to do it without violence. And it may cost us something. It cost King his life, it cost Jesus his life. Gandhi died. But ultimately it is the only way to bring peace and well-being to the world. And Jesus is inviting us into this way of being. And it's not all the big things of the world, but in our relationships with one another. How can we learn to confess the wrongs that we do, the mistakes we make, the ignorance that we show, our naivety, to listen and understand how the other experiences life and our responses, or to offer forgiveness when others make mistakes or act in impulsive ways that hurt us, to be reconciled and find a way forward together that seeks the well-being of the whole, of the common good. Because this is the vision of God, the way of Jesus, is a vision of an inclusive community. And not a perfect community. There will be conflicts and bits of envy and jealousy and niggles, but it's a way of growing and maturing in humility together and recognising our errors and forgiving the errors in others, of seeking and giving forgiveness, of seeking a way of love which is deeper and richer, a way that will bring peace, true peace, to the life of the world. This is the way of Jesus, and this is what we're invited into. Will you journey with him into this way of life, this way of love, this way of grace, for the sake of the world, people and all its creatures, and for the earth itself?